Do you mind if I sit beside you? Everyone here sees my wheelchair, but you were the first person who simply saw me.
The single dad had come to the wedding expecting to sit alone, eat quietly, and leave before anyone noticed him. He never imagined that the woman who would take the empty seat beside him would be an older billionaire CEO who had not walked in years, and that one delayed driver, one quiet conversation, and one little girl waiting outside a park would change both of their lives forever. Daniel had learned to become invisible. At 38, he was raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, alone, working long hours at a small auto repair shop, and doing everything he could to make sure his daughter never felt the emptiness left behind by the people who had walked out of their lives. His wife had died years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Daniel with a mountain of bills and a little girl who still sometimes asked why her mother could not come back. Daniel never had the heart to give her an answer that could make sense of something so painful. So he simply hugged her tighter and promised that as long as he was alive, she would never have to face the world alone. That evening, Daniel had been invited to a wedding by an old friend from work. He almost refused because he could not afford a new suit, but his friend insisted. Daniel arrived wearing the best dark jacket he owned, carefully repaired at the sleeve, and sat at a table near the edge of the reception hall. Around him, families laughed, couples danced, and wealthy guests raised glasses beneath sparkling lights. Daniel smiled whenever someone looked his way, but inside, he felt painfully out of place. He had spent years watching other people celebrate while he quietly worried about rent, school fees, groceries, and whether the old car outside would survive another winter. Then the doors opened, and the room became strangely quiet. An older woman in an elegant wheelchair was brought into the reception by a young girl who looked to be around 10. The woman was dressed simply but unmistakably expensively, with silver-gray hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders and an expression that carried both strength and exhaustion. She was Evelyn Hart, a billionaire CEO whose company owned businesses across the country. Most people in the room knew her name. Few knew what her life had become after a terrible accident had left her paralyzed several years earlier. Evelyn's daughter, Sophie, pushed her wheelchair through the crowded room. But instead of joining the loudest table, Evelyn asked her daughter to take her outside for some fresh air. The reception had become overwhelming, and Sophie understood immediately. They left through the side entrance and waited near a small park behind the wedding venue while their driver went to bring the car around. Daniel happened to step outside a few minutes later. He needed a quiet place to breathe. He sat alone on a bench overlooking the park, holding a cup of untouched coffee between his hands. He did not notice Evelyn until Sophie gently moved her wheelchair toward the same bench. There were several empty seats, but Evelyn chose the one directly beside him. Daniel glanced at her, offered a polite smile, and moved slightly to give her more space. He did not stare at her wheelchair or ask what had happened. That small act of normalcy caught Evelyn's attention. For years, people had either treated her like fragile glass or like a billionaire whose problems did not matter. Daniel did neither. He simply treated her like another tired person sitting on a bench. Sophie sat nearby, watching the road for their driver. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The driver still had not arrived. Daniel noticed the little girl's growing frustration and quietly offered her the unopened pastry he had taken from the reception. Sophie hesitated, but Evelyn nodded. The girl accepted it with a grateful smile. Daniel then noticed that Evelyn's hands were cold. Without making a big deal of it, he removed his jacket and carefully placed it across her lap. That simple gesture broke through something inside Evelyn that money had never been able to reach. She began asking Daniel about his life, and he answered honestly. He told her about Lily, his daughter, about the repair shop, about the small apartment they shared, and about how difficult it was to raise a child while pretending everything was fine. He admitted that there were nights when he sat in his car before going home because he needed a few minutes to gather himself before Lily saw how exhausted he was. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had spent years surrounded by lawyers, assistants, executives, and people who wanted something from her. Daniel wanted nothing. He did not even know who she was. Then Sophie asked Daniel why he was alone at the wedding. Daniel looked toward the glowing reception hall and quietly explained that his daughter had stayed with a neighbor because he could not afford to bring her. He said he had come only because an old friend had reminded him that being a father did not mean he had to stop living his own life. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She understood that feeling more than he knew. Her own daughter had become her strength after the accident. Sophie had learned to help her mother with things most children never had to think about. Yet Evelyn sometimes wondered whether she had unintentionally stolen part of her daughter's childhood by becoming dependent on her. Their conversation continued until headlights finally appeared at the end of the road. The driver had arrived almost 40 minutes late. Evelyn's assistant rushed toward them, apologizing repeatedly, but Evelyn barely reacted. She was looking at Daniel. For the first time in years, she had spent an evening with someone who had not been impressed by her wealth, frightened by her condition, or interested in her company. He had simply noticed that she was cold. Before Daniel could leave, Evelyn asked him to write down his phone number. Daniel hesitated, wondering why a billionaire would ever need the number of a struggling mechanic. But Sophie smiled and told him that her mother did not usually ask twice. That night, Daniel returned home and found Lily asleep on the couch waiting for him. He covered her with a blanket and stood quietly beside her. His phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. She did not offer him money. She did not offer him a job. She simply thanked him for treating her like a person. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Evelyn remained in contact. Their conversations slowly became the brightest part of both their days. Daniel repaired small things around Evelyn's home that her expensive staff had overlooked, while Evelyn quietly helped Daniel find better opportunities at the repair shop without ever making him feel like charity. But then Daniel discovered something that changed everything. Evelyn's company was preparing to close the small repair facility where Daniel worked. Hundreds of mechanics were about to lose their jobs. Daniel assumed Evelyn had known all along and had simply been pretending to care about him. He stopped answering her calls. For several days, Evelyn had no idea why Daniel had disappeared. When she finally learned what had happened, she ordered an investigation into the closure. She discovered that executives had hidden financial information from her and were planning to shut down profitable community facilities simply to increase their bonuses. Evelyn could have solved the problem with a signature, but instead she went personally to Daniel's repair shop. Daniel was stunned when her wheelchair appeared at the entrance. She explained that she had not known about the decision, and she refused to defend herself with her wealth or position. She simply apologized. Then she announced that the facility would remain open and would become the first branch of a new program designed to provide stable jobs and technical training for struggling parents. Daniel realized then that Evelyn had not entered his life because she needed someone to rescue her. She had entered it because, somewhere along the way, two lonely people had recognized the same pain in each other. Months passed. Daniel's life changed slowly. His daughter Lily became close friends with Sophie. The two girls began spending weekends together, drawing pictures in Evelyn's garden and laughing as if they had known each other forever. Daniel's repair shop became more successful, but he never forgot the man he had been before Evelyn came into his life. And Evelyn changed too. She began traveling again, not because she could walk, but because she had stopped believing that a wheelchair meant her life had to become smaller. Daniel never treated her disability as something that made her less of a woman. He treated her as someone who still had dreams, fears, humor, anger, and a heart capable of loving. 1 year after the wedding, Daniel found himself sitting beside Evelyn again, this time outside the same little park where they had first met. Their driver was late again. Sophie laughed about it while Lily complained that they were going to miss the ice cream truck. Daniel looked at Evelyn and smiled. They both remembered that first night. The empty bench. The cold evening. The delayed driver. The lonely father. The billionaire CEO who had everything except someone who saw beyond her wheelchair. Daniel reached over and gently placed his hand beside hers. Evelyn smiled. Neither of them needed to say what had happened. Sometimes the greatest changes in life begin with something so small that nobody else notices: a seat beside a stranger, a jacket placed over someone's knees, a child sharing a pastry, or simply choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier. If this story touched your heart and you believe kindness can give people a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to SoulTales for more emotional stories about kindness, family, and unexpected second chances. Daniel had once believed that sitting alone at a wedding was proof that life had forgotten him. He later realized it had been the exact opposite. Sometimes life makes you sit alone for a while because it is quietly preparing a seat beside you for someone who will change everything. And if this story reminded you that people should be valued for their hearts rather than their circumstances, please support this video with a like and a comment. Your small engagement may help this story reach someone who needs the same reminder. Before we end, comment, "Kindness changes everything," if you believe one small act of kindness can change a person's entire life. Because Daniel gave Evelyn nothing that money could buy. He gave her something far more precious: the feeling of being seen, respected, and loved exactly as she was.